Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 341, Gulping It Down. The episode begins with Ash and the gang having arrived in a new city on their way to Petalburg City, because apparently there was a city between Verdanturf and Petalburg that we just didn't know about, and they decided to stop in the city harbor's park area for a little break, since Petalburg City was taking them a while to get to. Ash and the gang were currently on a picnic blanket, having some sandwiches for lunch, along with some water, while Brock, while eating, was looking at his guidebook, and the map in the guidebook stated that they were not far from Petalburg City anymore. Hearing this made Ash bring up his upcoming gym battle against Norman in Petalburg and state how excited he was for it. Max warned Ash that he shouldn't be super excited to face his father Norman, since Norman was strong as fuck, although Ash rebutted that was exactly why he was excited, assuring Max that he was already aware of Norman's strength. May then brought up how she was super excited to go home, since she wanted to taste her mother's cooking again, and also just see home, or her parents in general. And Max agreed with everything May said, specifically excited for his mom to cook hamburgers. Though he quickly changed his mind, not knowing what he would eat first when he got back to his house in Petalburg, since his mom made a lot of good shit, with May agreeing. All this talk about food was making May hungry, and she hadn't had her lunch yet, so she went to go grab a sandwich that Brock had prepared, but before May could grab it, something grabbed it from her and began walking away with it, before inhaling it in one bite. And then this thing that had stolen from May went up to Brock and Ash and Max as well, and took all of their sandwiches and food that they were eating, gulping them up in one bite as well. To make matters worse, this thing also ate the cup containers that held the water Ash and the gang were drinking. Max soon recognized this thing as a Pokemon, in specific, one that was known for being a round green blob, known as a Gulpin. But before Max could say anything, this Gulpin then went for Pikachu's Pokemon food that it was currently eating, and it, instead of eating the dish that the bowl was being served in, actually spit it out. Or should I say, burped it out, because Gulpin was a disgusting bitch like that. It would inhale food in like a single blow. It was just fucking disgusting, but that's why it was called Gulpin, because it would gulp shit down. Anyways, Ash and the gang were amazed by how fucking disgusting Gulpin was, and Ash took the opportunity, with Gulpin just sitting there after inhaling all their shit, to scan the Gulpin with his Pokedex to find out that it was in fact called a Gulpin, and it had the ability to digest anything it swallowed, having a very large appetite. Max was surprised that a Pokemon as small as Gulpin could have ate all their lunches, but he was still angry as fuck at it, and yelled at it. Although May tried to defend Gulpin, stating that it was both funny looking and cute. The Gulpin then takes the opportunity to slide away as an emergency distress signal siren sounded, echoing throughout the entire city from a loudspeaker. Officer Jenny was the one speaking on the speaker, although she was kind of hard to hear since the siren was still going off. Although she did warn all the residents of the city that Gulpin were messing with the city to the point where a state of emergency had been issued, and every resident of the city were supposed to evacuate immediately. Ash and the gang were shocked by this, as Nurse Joy could then be heard as well, meaning that Officer Jenny was likely at the Pokemon Center, as Nurse Joy essentially wished all the trainers good luck against the Gulpin and not dying to them, knowing that good luck would be needed. Ash and the gang then made their way through the city streets, looking to exit the city, obviously, just as they had been ordered, because even though they weren't residents, they were still visitors, so they were likely supposed to evacuate as well. Although, when they walk along the streets, they find them all deserted, leading Ash and the gang to come to the conclusion that the residents must have evacuated already, which in turn led May and Max to question why an entire city would have to evacuate just because of a Pokemon infestation. Basically, a whole bunch of one Pokemon gathered together. Although, just then, Ash and the gang heard a woman scream nearby, which broke the awkward silence that had formed when everyone else had evacuated. Though apparently, not everyone had evacuated, as Ash and the gang headed towards the source of the scream to go investigate, and they eventually found, after running as fast as they could, a woman cowering in fear, leaning against the wall inside of her local bakery, as Ash then questioned the lady on what was going on, leading the lady to point nervously at the bread counter in her bakery, where a group of Gulpin had all gathered together into one pile on top of the bread, and were eating absolutely every piece of bread. This leads Ash to tell Pikachu to use Thunderbolt in order to protect the woman's bread, who happened to be a midget. Although before Pikachu could use Thunderbolt, the Gulpin overwhelmed him by using Body Slam on him all at once. So basically, Pikachu was getting flooded by Gulpin. Ash himself then goes up to all the Gulpin and looks inside of the huge stockpile of them and finds Pikachu buried at the bottom, although he was both paralyzed from the Body Slams and knocked out. Regardless, Ash pulled Pikachu out and put him back on his shoulder. Just then, May freaks out screaming, as she was the first one to notice a large amount of even more Gulpin started to pour into the bakery from the ceiling vents, and this eventually caused Ash and the gang and the woman who owned the bakery to be completely smothered by the sheer amount of Gulpin pouring into the room. Thankfully, right before Ash and the gang and the woman who owned the bakery were smothered to death by Gulpin, though, a sharp whistle from outside got Brock's attention, as Brock, being the simp that he was, recognized the whistle as Officer Jenny's police whistle. Brock then goes into his in-love state, just thinking about Officer Jenny and hearing the sound of her whistle, as he claims that Officer Jenny must have come to the bakery specifically to save him, stating that she was his hero. But before Brock could do any simping for Officer Jenny, as she actually entered the bakery, the Gulpin all piled over him, and he actually got smothered by the sheer amount of them. Thankfully, though, Officer Jenny was now in the building, so she sent out her Tangela and had to use Vine Whip on all of the Gulpin, using the vines to grab Ash and the gang out of all of the Gulpin and essentially pull them out of the huge pile of them. Of course, Officer Jenny saved the bakery owner as well. The Gulpin were annoyed by the Vine Whip, so they all left the bakery, sliding out as essentially one Gulpin, since they were all doing the same movements in the same order, deciding to leave the bakery behind to look for a new food source. Ash and the gang and the bakery owner were then dragged out onto the street by Tangela, and once they all untangled themselves, they thanked Officer Jenny for saving them, and mentally recovered from the PTSD-inducing experience they had just had. Officer Jenny wasn't really grateful for their thanks whatsoever, and instead just questioned why Ash and the gang didn't listen to the warning given by the loudspeaker to evacuate the town, although Max commented that the gang was new to the area, and they didn't know of any potential dangers with the Gulpin, so by the time the alarm went off, they weren't prepared to leave whatsoever. With the bakery owner also adding that she was partly at fault for Ash and the gang not evacuating, since she had screamed and alerted them to her shop. Although, when Officer Jenny simply said that none of this mattered and they had to evacuate immediately, although the bakery owner promised to leave immediately, May and Max told Jenny that they had nowhere to go if they were to leave, stating that they needed a place to rest. Since they were still tired from their journey and they wanted to get back to the rest that they were having with their picnic before the loudspeaker announcement happened. Jenny didn't want to waste time arguing with Ash and the gang, since the Gulpin may come back, so she simply just decided to take them to the city's local Pokemon Center so that they could continue talking, and Officer Jenny could see if she could find a better place for them to go. And also stated that if Ash and the gang really wanted their rest, then they could just get at the Pokemon Center anyways, though, so Ash and the gang agreed to this. Although they asked to ride there on her motorcycle, but Officer Jenny declined since she didn't have it, and stated that Ash and the gang would have to follow her on foot. When Ash and the gang and Officer Jenny did make it to the Pokemon Center, having split up with the bakery owner who evacuated, they found Nurse Joy that was manning a control panel that showed a large map of the city. Basically, Nurse Joy was monitoring the city to make sure that the evacuation was going well, and that the city was now working hard to remove the Gulpin from the city. Also, Nurse Joy's map had a way to track where the Gulpin currently were, apparently, so that was handy. And Nurse Joy then confirmed, upon looking at the control panel for a little while, to Officer Jenny, that the evacuation was complete and that measures to remove the Gulpin from the city were about to be launched. Starting on the first streets that they monitored, followed by the last streets that they monitored. Brock was amazed to hear Nurse Joy explaining something to Officer Jenny, bewildered at the fact that they were actually working together, and seeing this, he began to fall in love with both of them and get perverted fantasies about the two of them doing something together with him, although Max stops his little fantasies by threatening to drag him off. Seeing Nurse Joy so determined to look at how the Gulpin were doing and find ways to stop the Gulpin, though, made Brock so in love that even Max couldn't drag him away this time, making Max simply yell at Brock, pleading for him to stop, and he eventually snapped out of it, thankfully. Ash was amazed by the Pokemon Center, since it was basically like a fucking huge mansion compared to the regular one, and he had never seen a Nurse Joy operate a machine like that before. He'd only saw Nurse Joy healing Pokemon. This led Nurse Joy to explain that her job was more than just healing Pokemon at the Pokemon Center. Her job was to protect the city, particularly from Gulpin, explaining that the Pokemon Center also acted as a defense center against Gulpin attacks, having been specially designed. Leaving Ash and the gang to question how this center was designed anyways, and where all the special equipment came from, which led Nurse Joy to explain that the city had gotten so sick of constant Gulpin attacks to the point where Nurse Joy had decided to hire a scientist named Jacuzzi, who studied Gulpin, to help them stop the Gulpin, and building all this equipment was part of his efforts. Ash and the gang questioned where exactly Professor Jacuzzi was, wondering why he wasn't helping with the Gulpin, when suddenly Jacuzzi appeared, with Max commenting, whispering to May, that he kind of looked like Santa Claus. Nurse Joy hears Max's comments, and assures Max that he wasn't no goddamn Santa Claus. He was a very famous expert on Gulpin behavior. The first thing that Professor Jacuzzi said was that the Gulpin population must have been rising once again, somehow knowing this, as Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny confirmed this, telling Ash and the gang that Jacuzzi was able to know that the Gulpin were going to attack the city, since the Gulpin attacked the city around this time every year, devouring all the food in the city, explaining that this year the defense center's goal was to rid the town of Gulpin forever. Jacuzzi then stated that he had a theory as to where all the Gulpin were currently, and asked Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny to bring up a visual on the monitor Nurse Joy was looking at to see where the Gulpin were currently, and he saw that the Gulpin were currently between the grocery store and the bakery of the city. However, Jacuzzi then shows Ash and the gang a spot on the map that was in the center of the city, and explains that that's where he thought the Gulpin were heading to. Ash and the gang saw that Jacuzzi, when he was pointing to the center of the city, he was pointing to the Pokemon Center, which happened to be in the center of the city, and they asked Jacuzzi if the Gulpin were specifically coming to the Pokemon Center because they knew that he was trying to stop them, but Jacuzzi denied this, stating that all the Gulpin were actually just going to the center of town because that's where the city's main food storage was, since they obviously wanted to eat more food. and adds that the Gulpin were probably using the sewer system in the city to travel faster, making everyone immensely worried, wondering what they were going to do. But Jacuzzi comforts Ash and the gang by stating that he already had a plan that he had been working on that would apparently stop the Gulpin right in their tracks. Just then, an alarm on the monitor system goes off that Officer Jenny took note of and stated that the alarm was going off because it detected Gulpin movement, and also declared that Jacuzzi was right, as she and Nurse Joy both saw the Gulpin making their way towards the center of the city where the food storage was. This leads Officer Jenny to sound an emergency alarm throughout the city and inform Ash and the gang that it was time for an immobilization maneuver in order to stop the advancing Gulpin. Ash and the gang promised to do everything that they could to help, and soon enough, Ash and the gang found themselves with Officer Jenny and Professor Jacuzzi on a bridge, having driven there with Officer Jenny's motorcycle, having set up a blockade to block the Gulpin from reaching the center by positioning themselves at the end of the bridge, which led toward the city center, with a large armored vehicle parked behind them, with Professor Jacuzzi inside to act as even more of a barricade. Now that the blockade had been set up, all Ash and the gang and Officer Jenny and Jacuzzi had to do was wait for the Gulpin to show up, and they were fast approaching, so Officer Jenny asked if Ash and the gang were ready, and they said that they were. And once the Gulpin were visible, approaching from the other side of the bridge, Jacuzzi put his plan in action while still inside the armored truck, because the armored truck was his plan, as he launched a missile at all the Gulpin from the vehicle, having to lock onto the Gulpin through the vehicle's camera, and then open up the back of the truck by pulling a lever in order to even launch this missile. Once the missile was launched high into the air, though, and began to fall toward all the Gulpin, Jacuzzi then pressed a button in the vehicle to activate the true purpose of the missile, as the missile then opened up to reveal a very large Pokeblock dispenser instead, landing right in front of the Gulpin, who started to inspect it. Ash and the gang, especially May and Max, wondered why Jacuzzi was using a giant Pokeblock as his main plan, with Jacuzzi then coming out of the armored vehicle beside Ash and the gang, revealing that the Pokeblock was actually 3 massive Pokeblocks combined, stating that he actually combined them himself, since he made his own special blend developed over several years of a type of Pokeblock, and apparently this special blend of Pokeblock, or 3 Pokeblocks rather, were composed of all 108 ingredients, which were especially known to attract Gulpin. Apparently there were 108 ingredients that attracted Gulpin, I guess. Holy fuck. Anyways, Jacuzzi elaborated that since the Pokeblock was made out of ingredients that attracted Gulpin, the Gulpin should not be able to resist the Pokeblocks and be drawn to them. So therefore, he was going to use the Pokeblocks in some way to lure the Gulpin away. And he found the perfect chance to when the Gulpin started trying to eat the Pokeblocks, and smother them as well. And since the Gulpin were now on the Pokeblock, having smothered them, this gave Jacuzzi the opportunity to pull a remote control out of his lab coat pocket that controlled the Pokeblocks. Since Jacuzzi had attached a contraption to the Pokeblocks, Jacuzzi pressed a button on this remote control to activate this contraption, which was a helicopter rotor, which spinned extremely fast and carried the Pokeblocks up, meaning that it started to carry up the Gulpin as well, since the Gulpin were on top of the Pokeblocks. Brock expressed his doubts that the Gulpin would be able to stay on the now spinning Pokeblocks without falling off, but Jacuzzi just laughed, stating that that wasn't his plan. Sure enough, just as Brock predicted, all the Gulpin fell off the Pokeblocks as the Pokeblocks further ascended up into the sky. Although the Gulpin were so desperate for the Pokeblocks that they simply just jumped back on and stayed on, as, just as Jacuzzi had planned, the Pokeblocks began going in a different direction, away from the city, leading Brock to state how he was impressed with Jacuzzi and admitted that he had no belief that his plan would work. Jacuzzi simply laughed again, stating he didn't really care about any of that shit. He was just happy that his plan to get rid of Gulpin had worked like a charm, and Ash and the gang, Officer Jenny, and Jacuzzi began to celebrate. The Gulpin appeared to finally be gone, but the celebration was then cut short as the Pokeblocks, even with the helicopter rotor, were suddenly pulled up even higher into the sky than they should have been by an outside force, being a mechanical hand that was attached to a balloon, being none other than Team Rocket's Meowth balloon, with Team Rocket revealing themselves by doing their evil laughter. Jacuzzi saw Team Rocket and demanded that they give back the Pokeblocks, but Team Rocket refuses and states that the Pokeblocks were now going to be their own, and they say their motto, declaring their plan to utilize the Pokeblocks. Although Jacuzzi, even though it makes sense for anyone to not know who Team Rocket was, no one especially didn't know who Team Rocket was, and was just left confused by their motto, since he was basically a cooped-up scientist, so he knew nothing about what was going on in the outside world, pretty much, at least in terms of criminals, so Ash just explained to him that Team Rocket was no good, although James corrected Ash, stating that they had to be decent to be able to steal Pokeblocks. Of course, James meant decent as in a good stealer, not good as in morally. But anyways, May then demanded that Team Rocket give back the Pokeblocks so that they could continue leading the Gulpin away, but Jesse simply threatened the Gulpin, stating that if the Gulpin wanted the Pokeblocks, then they would have to come and get it themselves. And James and Meowth shared Jesse's sentiment, taunting Ash and the gang, as did Wobbuffet, as it forcibly popped out of its Pokeball. And just then, that's exactly what happened, as the Gulpin were angry and wanted the Pokeblocks back, so they started to launch sludge bombs at the Meowth balloon. And these sludge bombs immediately cover the Meowth balloon in brown goo, and this goo weighs the balloon down, causing it to begin descending down and quickly crash down onto the bridge. Team Rocket comes out of the wreckage of their balloon and gets angry at the Gulpin for causing the crash, yelling at them, As Team Rocket then gets up from the injuries they sustained from the crash, and Jessie holds the Pokeblocks over her head so that the Gulpin couldn't get a hold of them, while Meowth and James prepared to fight the Gulpin to prevent them from reaching Jessie. However, the Gulpin just used a stockpile, turning purple, which impresses and excites Professor Jacuzzi, stating that he knew from his research on Gulpin that a stockpile was always followed by the move Spit Up, and right on cue, the Gulpin then launched their Spit Ups, smashing into Team Rocket and sending them blasting off. And as they were sent flying, the Pokeblocks falls from Jessie's hands, and Brock manages to catch it. Despite catching the 3 Pokeblocks before they fell to the ground, though, this didn't work out in the best-case scenario for Brock, as he had to physically jump in order to reach the Pokeblocks, and the Pokeblocks landed straight on his head, causing him immense pain. Jacuzzi thanks Brock for catching the Pokeblocks, and begins to talk about how impressed he was by the Gulpin Horde's combination of Stockpile and Spit Up, admitting that was a really good strategy. Impressed that Pokemon came up with it, and not a Pokemon's trainer. However, Max then interrupts Jacuzzi's glazing of the Gulpin, stating that the Gulpin were still their enemies, pointing out how the Gulpin were now making their way towards Brock, wanting to retrieve the Pokeblocks. And Jacuzzi then looks to see Brock freaking out in fear, wondering if he should just drop the Pokeblocks so that the Gulpin could go after them and not him. But regardless, he was just fucking scared, seeing the Horde come to him. Thankfully, Officer Jenny then takes action and sends out her Tangela, Meganium, and Parasect to protect Brock, specifically ordering Tangela to use Vine Whip, Meganium to use Razor Leaf, and Parasect to use Stun Spore to slow the Gulpin Horde down. May was impressed by Officer Jenny's Pokemon, seeing how they were actually holding the Gulpin off for a little bit, but Max was worried that the Gulpin wouldn't be held off for long, since he knew that Gulpin were poison types, and therefore they resisted grass attacks, so they should not be that affected by them. Even though Ash's Trico was a grass type as well, he really wanted to help Officer Jenny, so he decided to send Trico out, presumably sending specifically Trico out, since, he just wanted to use another grass type. And as soon as Trico came out of the Pokeball, he instantly put his twig in his mouth, as he did basically with every battle, just sometimes he did it so fast it was impossible to see, and he stared a Gulpin down, trying to intimidate it. And this worked, as the Gulpin all angrily launched sludge bombs at Trico, but Trico dodged every single one of them attacks and by jumping, and used Bullet Seed, which managed to knock Gulpin back. Ash then went to have Trico use Bullet Seed again, but before he could do this, Jacuzzi pressed a button on his remote control, which activated a rocket on the Pokeblocks, and it caused the Pokeblocks to fly off, almost burning Brock in the process by the fire that came out of the rocket, as Brock freaked out. Although thankfully for Brock, before he was burned by the rocket fire, the rocket sent the Pokeblocks flying off into the distance toward the river, and it eventually starts going down the river above it, leading the Gulpin to dive into the water and begin to give chase by swimming after it. Ash and the gang cheered happily at the fact that the Gulpin were now swimming away, with Ash and May believing that the Gulpin were now gone forever, and the worst was over, and the Gulpin wouldn't try eating any more shit anymore. Officer Jenny wasn't as happy, though, as she reminded Ash and May, along with the rest of the gang, that the Gulpin would eventually be back once they caught up with the Pokeblocks and then got hungry again and needed more food, so suggested that they go back to the defense center and prepare for Gulpin's inevitable return. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, they were immensely depressed and complaining about their last blast-off that had just occurred as they walked along the river, wandering around not knowing where to go, also complaining about how fucking hungry they were from doing all this walking and not having any nutrients. Although Meowth pointed out that none of them would ever get food if they were just where they were now, which was the outskirts of the city. Meowth was sure of this until Wobbuffet then pointed something out to Team Rocket, leading Team Rocket to see only the shell of the Pokeblocks left, as well as the Gulpin all leaving, indicating that the Gulpin had tracked down the Pokeblocks and had ate them all, and were now going back into the town to look for more food. James initially suggests that Team Rocket go to the very edge of the river where the Pokeblock shell was and try and scavenge for any remains from it, but Meowth and Jessie hated this idea, with Jessie commenting how valuable the Gulpin could be in leading Team Rocket to food, since they always seem to find their way to it. So Meowth suggested that Team Rocket try following the Gulpin in hopes that they would lead them to food, and all of Team Rocket, including Wobbuffet, cheered at this idea as they followed the Gulpin. Meanwhile, back at the defense center, when night had arrived in the city, the alarm sounded once again on the monitor that Nurse Joy was using, and then all the power goes out across the entire city, turning the entire city into an area of darkness. Nurse Joy then saw on the monitor and reported to Jenny that the Gulpin were in fact coming back, so Officer Jenny made an announcement over the citywide alarm and alerted everyone in the city that the Gulpin swarm was coming back and advised them to take cover. How was Nurse Joy able to use the monitor even when the power was cut, you may ask? Well, it was because she knew that the cause of the power going out was an underground cable being cut thanks to the Gulpin traveling underground, and therefore she was able to prepare the backup generator in the defense center and use it to provide emergency power. Ash and the gang then looked on the monitor and saw that Nurse Joy was right. The Gulpin were in fact moving underground through the sewer system, and were heading directly for the food storage in the center of the city once again, and Ash and the gang struggled as they didn't know what to do. We then see inside the sewers as the Gulpin horde was in fact going through the sewers, with Team Rocket still following them, wanting to get to the food storage themselves, as the thought of food was now more on their minds than the Gulpin even. They were that hungry for food, that a Pokemon obsessed with food wasn't even as obsessed as them. Just then, back at the defense center, Officer Jenny came up with an idea as she instructed Nurse Joy to activate the shutters in the underground sewers, and Nurse Joy pressed a button to do this, which caused the two sewer entrances that led to the center of the city to be closed off. So the Gulpin Horde had to go down the only other path that was available that would take them above ground instead, as opposed to going underground in the sewer. Although Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny knew that if the Gulpin came above ground, it would only prevent them from reaching the center of the city for a little bit longer, and the Gulpin would still need to be stopped. So, Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny requested that Jacuzzi use another Pokeblock. But Jacuzzi rebutted with two things. One being that he didn't have enough time to make another Pokeblock mixture, and two, the Gulpin were too smart to fall for the same trick twice. So they wouldn't fall for the Pokeblock thing again by jumping back onto the Pokeblock if they fell off of it. Also admitting that even he, as a Gulpin expert, had no clue what to do next, stating that even if he could get the Gulpin to stay on another Pokeblock, it wouldn't work long term, as the Gulpin would eventually just eat that Pokeblock, and then, since their appetite never seemed to end, they would constantly start searching for more food again, and would go back to the center of the town where they were going now. Jacuzzi, followed by Ash and the gang, then panic, along with Nurse Joy, as they look on the monitor and see that the Gulpin had very rapidly progressed throughout the sewers, and now they were about to make their way up above ground onto the streets, and therefore they would soon make it to the center of the city. Knowing how dire the situation was, Officer Jenny volunteered to go stop the Gulpin, leading Jacuzzi to thank Officer Jenny, pleading with her to do what she could to at least hold back the Gulpin. Ash and Pikachu were determined to help, knowing that the Gulpin would have to be fought, and they were definitely down for a battle. So, with that, Ash, Pikachu, and Officer Jenny went out onto the streets, and we then see the Gulpin emerge from the sewer and into the streets as they fill the still abandoned streets entirely, and they all come out onto the streets as a manhole cover blows off the pavement. And with that, the Gulpin Horde then head towards the food storage warehouse that was shaped like a large Pokeball. However, before the Gulpin could make it very far, Ash and Officer Jenny, along with the rest of the gang, having decided to join in as well, stand in the way, blocking the Gulpin's path. And Ash then sends Pikachu to battle the Gulpin as it hops off his shoulder, while Officer Jenny then sends her Parasect, Meganium, and Tangela shortly after. Pikachu then uses Thunderbolt, and Meganium uses Razor Leaf, Tangela uses Vine Whip, and Parasect uses Stun Spore, with all of these attacks knocking out a number of Gulpin, but with every Gulpin that goes down, more continue to come out of the sewer, so really the number of Gulpin wasn't going down at all. And the Gulpin eventually formed a line, trying to protect each other from getting hit. Pikachu, Parasect, Tangela, and Meganium try their best to keep attacking with the same attacks, but the Gulpin simply just continue heading towards Ash and the gang, leaving May, Brock, Max, Ash, and Officer Jenny to all get frustrated as fuck, as none of the attacks were working. But just as the Gulpin were about to charge at Ash and the gang and Officer Jenny, none other than Jacuzzi showed up, driving from a hidden alley in his armored truck, and parked his armored truck right between the Gulpin and Ash and the gang and Officer Jenny, blocking the Gulpin's path, stating that the Gulpin had made it far enough. Jacuzzi then declares, while still inside his armored truck, that he was going forth with Plan B, as he activated a switch inside his truck that caused a large cannon and two satellite dishes resembling ray guns to pop out on the outside of the armored vehicle, and he then aimed these at the oncoming Gulpin. Ash couldn't help but wonder what Jacuzzi's plan was, as he stared at the armored truck in awe, just as Jacuzzi pressed a button inside of his truck, causing the dishes to activate and fire pink beams. And when these pink beams made contact with the Gulpin, the pink beams appeared to suck the Gulpin up and make them disappear, leading Ash and the gang to wonder where they were disappearing to. Jacuzzi didn't provide an answer, but Ash and the gang soon found out what was going on, as Jacuzzi then pressed a switch to activate the cannon connected to the armored truck, aimed the large cannon connected to the armored truck, and proceeded to fire the Gulpin one by one into the distance with the cannon, far, far away. One by one, outside the city, and Jacuzzi continues to repeat this process, absorbing more and more Gulpin with the pink beams, and then launching them out of the city with the cannon, as Ash and the gang stared in awe at this mechanism, amazed, although they asked how the mechanism works, leading Jacuzzi to explain it to them, stating that it worked much like a Pokeball, sucking up the Gulpin, and then it registers them into a database in his truck, and once they were in the database, they were able to be located and pinpointed as being inside the cannon after being sucked up. And then, so basically, once they were sucked up, they were put in a database, and then from this database they were put into the cannon, and then the cannon launched them out into the city, officially introducing this mechanism as the Mach 3 particle cannon, which was inspired by Gulpin's stockpile and spit-up attacks, as stockpile gathered up energy and then spit it out, much like how the mechanism would gather up the Gulpin like a stockpile and then spit them out. Eventually, only one Gulpin remained, so Jacuzzi went to go suck it up, but right as he tried to, the truck stopped working, including the Mach 3 particle cannon. Ash and the gang were confused as to what happened, leading Jacuzzi to admit that he must have used too much power, so the machine got overloaded, due to the subatomic particles of the machine becoming unstable. So while Jacuzzi tried to fix his machine by fiddling with the switches, Ash noticed that the one Gulpin was getting away since it was no longer being attacked. So Ash changed that by sending out his Trico and having it use Bullet Seed on the Gulpin to stop it from moving. But Gulpin counters with a Sludge, which deflects the Bullet Seed, causing Bullet Seed and Sludge to collide. On the bright side, though, even though Trico kept attacking and Gulpin kept countering with Sludge, Jacuzzi had the opportunity to continue fiddling with his machine, and he eventually managed to get it back online as the lights came back on, just as Ash ordered Trico to use Pound. Jacuzzi happened to fire his cannon machine right as Trico used Pound, which meant that when the beam hit Gulpin, since Trico was connecting with it, the beam hit Trico as well, sucking them both in the machine. Leading Ash and the gang to simply watch in horror as Trico and Gulpin were now being registered inside the machine's database, and there was nothing they could do about it. Sure, they were happy with Gulpin being registered, but they preferred if Trico wasn't. Anyways, while Trico and Gulpin were inside the machine, still being registered, Gulpin took the opportunity to use a stockpile and then follow up with a spit-up. Though Trico used Bullet Seed at the same time, and was still knocked away, since the spit-up was so powerful. However, the spit-up and Bullet Seed colliding did cause an explosion, which therefore damaged the registry part of the machine a bit. Seeing the damage, Ash and May pound on the side of the truck, demanding the release of Trico and Gulpin from Jacuzzi, although Jacuzzi retorted that he couldn't release them because the machine seemed to be fucked, and he was trying to fix it, fiddling with some buttons, but he ended up just causing an explosion again, after the machine had experienced sparking and smoking. So this destroyed the truck completely, and throwing rubble everywhere. Officer Jenny saw this and feared that Ash and the gang may have been hit by the rubble, as she didn't see them at first, but she soon did a head count looking around the rubble that had hit the area, and saw that Ash and the gang were all safe and accounted for, including Jacuzzi, because he had landed on top of the rubble of his vehicle. And after Officer Jenny checked on everyone's mental and physical states to make sure they were okay, Jacuzzi then noticed something strange in the distance, which was two balls of pink light rising up from the debris and all the rubble. And Jacuzzi soon noticed that they were the absorbed energies of Trico and Gulpin, as they had been freed from the database in the explosion, and when they took shape, they expanded to a huge size, essentially being now Gargantuan Trico and Gargantuan Gulpin. And as the Gargantuan Gulpin and Trico stared each other down, with the city lights illuminating them since they were about as tall as the city lights, Ash and the gang were immensely shocked, commenting that the two Pokemon appeared to be the size of buildings. May questioned if Trico and Gulpin had just evolved, although Max was very annoyed by May's stupid comment, assuring May that Trico and Gulpin did not fucking evolve because they looked the same, they were just bigger. So after Max had finished his sigh of annoyance, Brock questioned how Trico and Gulpin had become super big, leading Jacuzzi to explain that the Gulpin spit-up attack had reacted with the subatomic particles in such a way that it caused the two Pokemon's size to increase. Or in other words, the Gulpin spit-up had overridden the system and caused a side effect, which was the enhanced size. Despite Gulpin's new size, it was still hungry, so it proceeded to turn around and slide away to the food storage, causing immense damage to buildings and throwing up a huge cloud of dust as it did so. So Ash ordered Trico to intervene after running up to Trico, and Trico, knowing that this meant to stop Gulpin from reaching the food storage, nodded to Ash, assuring him that he understood, and jumped over to Gulpin, landing right in front of it and pressing its hands on Gulpin's head to block Gulpin's path. And Trico then glares at Gulpin, trying to intimidate it, as Officer Jenny saw that there were actually some citizens that hadn't evacuated the city after all, as they were running out of their destroyed homes. Screaming in fear as loud as possible, as Officer Jenny simply urged them to keep moving and get out of the city as soon as possible, because now even Nurse Joy had to step in to help some other citizens evacuate to certain shelter areas that had been established, because Gulpin and Trico were now having a gigantic fight now. Since Trico couldn't hold Gulpin back anymore, so it managed to divert the rest of its strength to lift Gulpin up and smash it into a building, throwing it down hard. Although Gulpin retaliated with a sludge bomb, opening its mouth wide and firing several sludge bombs at once in a loud belching noise, almost like a burp. Although all these sludge bombs were missing Trico and were instead causing several buildings to explode when the sludge bombs collided with them, which made Max shocked and worried for the buildings, while May was worried about Trico, fearing that it would eventually get hit, while Jacuzzi was just thinking to himself, wondering if it was a mistake to build his machine, and trying to come up with a way to reverse the gigantification effect. Just then, May's concern was valid, as Trico did get hit by one of the sludge bombs, causing it to be knocked down onto a building, subsequently causing a whole bunch of rubble and debris to come falling down, almost crushing Ash, who had run up to Trico by this point. But thankfully, Ash managed to run away to avoid the rubble, running up to Nurse Joy, when he then got an idea, as he asked Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny if he could borrow Officer Jenny's loudspeaker that she usually had, and Officer Jenny obliged, leading Ash to run back up to Trico and decide to use it to shout Trico commands, although he didn't know what to command when he suddenly noticed the lake on the edge of the city, and he ordered Trico to force Gulpin close to the lake, and then throw it in. Trico nodded as it grabbed Gulpin and lifted him over its head, and then spinned extremely fast to give himself more force as he threw Gulpin into the lake. Although, before Gulpin landed in the lake, it prepared a stockpile midair. Meanwhile, as for Team Rocket, even though the Gulpin was stopped by Trico, preventing it from going into the storage room, Team Rocket was able to get into the food storage room, and they stole bags and bags of food and were making a break for it out of the food storage with all their food, hoping that they wouldn't get caught. As they bragged about how much food they got and how excited they were to eat it, when suddenly they noticed a large shadow pass over them, and they looked up to see that it was Gulpin who had been thrown by Trico. Just then, even though Gulpin intended to hit Trico, it couldn't really control itself while up in the air, so when it launched a spit up after charging up the stockpile, it instead hit below him, just hitting Team Rocket and sending them blasting off, causing them to drop all the food that they had stole. Gulpin then lands in the lake, so Trico jumps in the lake to go after it and finish it off. Although Gulpin ends up catching Trico off guard as it surfaces from the bottom of the water, and right in front of Trico, it was able to knock it down, sending it flying into a nearby building, causing Officer Jenny to sound another alarm to warn any more stragglers to get out of the city immediately, fearing that perhaps people close to that building that had just been destroyed were still in the city. The damage had gotten so bad that even Ash and the gang, Nurse Joy, Officer Jenny, and Jacuzzi had to evacuate, with Officer Jenny pulling up a police rescue boat and having everyone jump on, as they all watched Trico stand back up and stare intensely at Gulpin as Gulpin stared back. Soon, Max noticed that Trico seemed to be weakening since it was breathing heavily and must have been getting very tired. Max cried out, trying to give Trico some courage as Gulpin used Stockpile to prepare for another spit-up attack. Thankfully for Trico, because of Max's yelling and warning, it was able to jump out of the way of the spit-up, leaving the spit-up to instead just go through the water and hit a concrete wall, making a hole in it. Just then, Trico started to glow in midair as it landed from its jump, meaning that the effects of the cannon's little mishap there were wearing off, and Trico landed on the boat that Ash and the gang were on, now back to its normal size, though still panting in exhaustion. Even falling to the ground, leading Nurse Joy to comment that the intensity of the battle Trico just fought must have caused him to shrink. Basically, Trico was so tired that it ran out of energy and caused the effects of the machine to wear off. Basically, maybe you could think of the machine giving the Pokemon more energy, but since Trico had utilized most of its current energy, the spare energy was converted into regular energy, so it caused him to just revert to his normal self. Anyways, Ash makes sure that Trico was alright, rushing to its side, although Trico couldn't respond as it was too busy breathing heavily, unable to speak, leading Nurse Joy to suggest that Ash have it rest in its Pokeball. Ash agreed that this was the best idea and recalled it. Meanwhile, as for the Gulpin, it had recovered from Trico's attacks and was still in its gargantuan form and was heading back to the food storage place in the center of the city. This caused everyone to panic, especially Jacuzzi, who stated that he had no other backup plans. He had used every possible machine that he had ready, admitting that he didn't know what to do. Just then, Ash got an idea as he sorted through his Pokeballs, trying to find one of his Pokemon to send out to battle Gulpin that wasn't Trico, but May stopped him, stating she had a better idea, telling Jacuzzi that despite Gulpin's size, it was still technically a normal Pokemon, so Jacuzzi should be able to catch the Gulpin with a Pokeball now that Trico had weakened it. Jacuzzi realized that May was right, and he decided to oblige, stepping forward and throwing a Pokeball, immediately capturing Gulpin. Well, kinda, as the Pokeball shook for a second, but after like 2 seconds, Gulpin immediately busted out of the Pokeball, with the Pokeball not even hitting the ground to shake before Gulpin broke out, leading Jacuzzi to come to the conclusion that the Gulpin must have been too big for the Pokeball to hold, and Jacuzzi panicked, not knowing what to do now, when suddenly Nurse Joy approached Jacuzzi and handed him a heavy ball, making Jacuzzi confident he could now capture the Gulpin. And Ash and the gang were confident as well, once Brock explained what a heavy ball even did, which was that it had the special ability to catch especially heavy Pokemon, so it would be perfect to capture Gulpin, adding that Gulpin would have no chance of escaping. And sure enough, Jacuzzi stepped forward and tossed the heavy ball, and after many shakes, Gulpin was successfully caught in the heavy ball, leading Ash and the gang, Jacuzzi, Officer Jenny, and Nurse Joy to celebrate. The sun then began to rise as Jacuzzi picked up the heavy ball, and Brock asked Jacuzzi if, since Gulpin had been captured now, if it would revert back to its normal size and the gargantuan effects would be cancelled. Jacuzzi was sure that Gulpin would return to the normal size, but much to his and Ash and the gang's surprise, when he sent Gulpin out, it was still huge. Since Jacuzzi assured everyone that this wouldn't be the case, everyone freaked out in fear, especially Officer Jenny, as she didn't want the whole incident with the oversized Gulpin to occur again, so she demanded that Jacuzzi recall Gulpin into its Pokeball, and Jacuzzi did so, recalling it into the heavy ball. Although it did take him a little while, since Officer Jenny's screaming had made him nervous, so he started fiddling around with the heavy ball before actually recalling it. Anyways, Ash then asked Jacuzzi what he planned to do with the huge-ass Gulpin that he had now, with Jacuzzi suggesting that he would either wait for Gulpin to return to normal size on its own and hope that the effects would wear off on their own, or what he was actually going to do, since he didn't have faith that the effects would wear off on their own, was work on a way to reverse the effects himself, confident that he could do it eventually, and told Ash and the gang not to worry, since he had 50 years worth of Gulpin knowledge, so he should be able to find some way to return Gulpin to its normal state. The episode then ends with Ash and the gang wishing Jacuzzi luck with this, and enjoying the view of the sunrise from the boat with him and Officer Jenny and Nurse Joy, and then Ash and the gang say goodbye to Jacuzzi, Officer Jenny and Nurse Joy, and set off once again.